So, Sharon, are these the stories of music's effectiveness to create change, especially in your domain, the labor sphere? Does that ever come up in education?
I think it doesn't so much anymore because it doesn't happen anymore. I mean, you think about, Pete Seeger at a time when he was very popular, well-known across the country, naming an album talking union. Very few people other than, Ken comes to mind, but very few other artists actually talk union anymore. And so, I think what you said about the impact on people on picket lines, they are taking their careers, their jobs, putting it all on the line, literally, to be on a picket line. And so that's so important. But one thing I think about a lot is just getting the idea of the importance of the labor movement sort of into the bloodstream of popular culture, and something that people think about and talk about at this point, where the percentage of people in unions is so low in this country. We're below 10% now. People just don't have any experience, personal experience. They're not, for the most part, they are not in unions. They don't have family members who are in unions. And they don't hear people, popular performers, singing about it, talking about it. And so I think that's why what you guys do is so important, because at least it starts to sort of normalize and bring it more to people's attention. So I wish it came up more, but it's just a sort of a sad state of affairs that it's just not in our popular culture the way it probably was, in the 30s and 40s when you had people like Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie singing about it.
And roughly what was union membership back then?
So the height of what we refer to as union density, the percentage of workers in this country being in unions, it hit its peak around the late 1950s, early 1960s at about 35%.
Oh.
But it's not quite an apples to apples comparison, because at that time, people who worked for the government didn't have a right to join unions. So that's just 35% of the private sector employment. Right now in the private sector, we're around 6%. So right now you get from that 6% to 10% because the government workers are unionized at a higher rate.
Okay.
Until we get to the Trump administration. And, in just the last few weeks, almost 1 million federal employees have lost the right to collective bargaining because of, one of the many executive orders that this president has signed.
So I'd like you to ask you to define terms like collective bargaining. But before you do, the thing I've been wanting to ask you most is, how do you define a just economy? What is a fair and just economy?
So I think there are a number of attributes, and I think about it in sort of two different ways. One, you can think about just basic fair treatment on the job, right? An economy where working class people go to work and they get paid a fair wage that can sustain a family, that they don't have to put their lives on the line for their livelihood, so they're safe at work. They can come home at the end of the day without worrying about getting hurt, getting sick, and they have some level of dignity and respect at work. So that's sort of on the micro level, if you will. The macro level, if you look at the whole economy, it's an economy where you're rewarded fairly for the work that you do, and that there is some equity in how the product that you produce is divided, the profit from that is divided fairly between the people who work to create that profit and those the owners of capital. And that, just on that measure, that is where you can see how unfair our economy has become. So you talk about labor share, which is a way of referring to the amount of growth in the economy that goes to paying the people who create that growth, that create that productivity. For a long period of time, even though there were a lot of things that you know, I think now we would say were not fair in the economy, but that level, that split between capital and labor was fairly consistent. Over the past couple of decades, though, coinciding with a pretty precipitous drop in the labor movement, that labor share has really plummeted. And so that means that people are working, they're going to work every day, they're working hard, they're doing their job, they're doing what they're supposed to, but they are taking home less and less of the value of what they produce. So somebody's taking it home, right? So who's taking it home? Those who control capital. And you see that in increase in dividends, stock buybacks, those kinds of mechanisms where the owners of capital are taking more and more CEO pay, right? That's skyrocketed. So that is, maybe I'm defining it in sort of the negative, that is an unfair economy.
Well, and this is what, I mean, Ken's song, I think, is just such a perfect continuation of Solidarity Forever. And I think it's on this record, the Talking Union. And so I want to read this is one of the verses from Solidarity Forever, which I think gets at this, the imbalance between how capital and labor are valued. The verse is, it is we who plowed the prairies, built the cities where they trade, dug the mines and built the workshops, endless miles of railroad laid. Now we stand outcast and starving amidst the wonders we have made, but the union makes us strong. And the chorus to Who'll Stand With Us is, the working people fuel the engine, while you yank the chain, we fight the wars and build buildings for someone else's gain. So it's just like the same old David and Goliath problem.
Yeah, and the one thing that sort of can shift that, we know, is the labor movement. So this country, I used to work for Senator Kennedy before he passed away, and he often said our country was never more productive or more fair than when the labor movement was at its height. We had less income inequality, that labor share was higher. So, you know, it's a very big economy. It's very complicated. But that piece is not actually that complicated. We know from history that when the labor movement is strong, when workers can collectively bargain, when they can countervail that power of big corporations by coming together, the economy is not perfectly fair. We've never lived through that kind of experience, but it's certainly more fair.
So I guess while we're at it, how do you define collective bargaining?
So collective bargaining is when working people who have a common interest can get together and aggregate their power and sit across the table and make demands based on their interests, and if necessary, withhold their labor in order to leverage those common demands.
Okay. So Ken, when you're on the, I mean, I'm assuming just from watching the music video, like there's some very personal stories, individual stories. I'd be curious to know, just in your interaction with fans, because I know you usually stick around and talk to the fans, what are you hearing from them?
About the political climate or about just overall? Well, you know, I will say, to touch on something you talked about, you know, labor using music as a tool. A gentleman by the name of Joe Uline, who I've lost contact with, was his job with the AFL-CIO was to reach out through the arts and tell the story of the labor movement to another generation via avenues that they wouldn't hear it otherwise, you know, not hearing about it in school. They might be from a generation now where it might have been their grandparents that you know, had the good union job and raised their family in a middle-class family. And so it's similar to Irish music, the way, you know, that you're telling the tales of the generations before. So in some ways, music or art was a good way to reach those people. So we've always been well in tuned, and I almost want to say partly felt responsible to tell that story. And then when you talk to the fan base, you know, we're like I said, we've always been on the front lines with these people, whether it's a strike or whether it's in good times, bad times. Just our friends, you know, like our friends here, but also we've been touring the world for 30 years in a trajectory that wasn't like pop band. Now we came up in each city with playing to 100 people and meeting the locals in the area and grassroots. So like we know the people, and we're all mostly, for the most part, in the same boat. And it's and I've watched those people, many of whom will lockstep with the band's beliefs, kind of shift over the narrative of politics. It's always been the case, divide and conquer, right? But it's been used to a different degree to divide the very people who should be unified together, to be more worried about what your pronoun is than the fact that, hey, why are we arguing about this little stuff while someone's stealing everything out the back door? And the division is incredible. So sometimes it's friends of mine that'll say, yeah, y'all, buying this, whatever the talking points are, and I'll say, but you used to agree with everything I said. Now all of a sudden I'm a commie, and you would have been with, and there's just been, for instance, if you think about a strike or something back in old days, you'd have, strike breakers or the goon squad come down to break up. You don't need to do that now. You just vilify the unions in the public sphere via social media, and you have people, even if it's not politics, maybe people are arguing over the fact that a worker is mad that another worker is making $5 an hour more than him. Like, don't begrudge that. We should all be, why is someone else making millions in a stock buyback, So just always gets back to divide and conquer. It's just usually a different playbook. And I don't know, I'm here tonight to learn from you, but I'm also here as someone who has been talking to the people, in their stories and their successes and their, I don't want to say failures, but when the economy's failed them, and hurt their families. I'm someone who just takes it all in and then opens my big mouth too much.
So would you say that one of your main goals in continuing to show up and advocate is to achieve greater class solidarity?
Yeah, no, if anyone in a band tells you that they think they can help achieve that, they're a little full of themselves. But, it's got to be that everyone doing their little part to swing the pendulum back to say, why is it? And I know, there's a million reasons why, but why is it that we're so divided? And why is it that the wealth gap just gets greater and greater? And we're content to argue about really non-important things, if you ask. When it comes to, for example, a union member who may be willing to vote against his own interests. And when I get back to saying the facts, to quote someone else, name any legislation that's been passed when the Republicans had the presidency, the Senate, the Congress, that's helped working people. Can you name any?
I cannot.
Right. Can anybody else? So, but a union member might vote against what's best because they're more caught up in the immigration or something else that's the flavor of the day.
So, Sharon, do you, from your point of view, everything that Ken's saying, how does that come up in your day-to-day work in scholarship and just working within the framework of the legal system?
So a lot of the work that I do is around trying to figure out why the law has failed working people. So it's, again, as Ken said, these are complicated problems. There's lots of factors that have gotten us to where we are. But I think about these statistics, we're trying to stick to facts. So about 70% of the American public supports unions, thinks they're good. More than 50%, or around 50% of the public have said that if they could be in a union, they would. So there's clearly a problem with like the transmission of that desire to be in a union, to have a dignity and that the benefits of being in a union bring, and the reality of being able to do it. So one part, my hypothesis is that one part of that problem is that we have a law that instead of, it may have been designed back, in the 1930s to translate that desire into that reality. It is failing to do that now. And so a lot of the work that we do at the center is trying to imagine what the law could do to do a better job of translating that desire into a reality. And so trying to understand, looking at how the law plays out in other countries, listening to workers about what is it in their lived experience that creates that hurdle, that obstacle to being able to organize a union in their workplace when they want to. Talking to labor leaders who are looking across lots of different campaigns about where they see those obstacles, and trying to imagine and talking to lots of people about what innovations, how could we imagine changing the law to help solve that problem. Now, there's still then the big problem of the broken political system of like, how would you eventually like get that to happen? But the first step is to know where you want to go.
So walk me through what are some of those, what's the vision template for where we need to be?
So there's lots of different pieces of it. One piece of it is the fact that if you think about making the decision to be in a union, sort of intuitively, that should be a discussion between the union and the worker, right? Like that is the workers turning over sort of some of their self-determination to this other organization. So that's a very big decision to make between the worker and the union. The way our law works is it allows the employer to put itself right in the middle of that conversation of making that decision, and to sort of bully and threaten workers about what will happen if they do choose the union. It's actually not the way it works in most other countries. The employer is supposed to stay out of that decision. So that's one problem that needs to be fixed. Another problem that needs to be fixed is the fact that we have a whole labor law system that's really different in this country than the way it works in most other countries. Here you have to organize a union company by company by company. Well, what happens is, maybe employers everywhere are sort of generally anti-union. It takes away some of their control, but there's incredible incentives in the way our law works for employers to really, really, really fight to not have a union because of a belief it puts them at a competitive disadvantage to their competitors, right? If their workers are unionized, they're going to get paid more, and then their competitors are going to be able to lowball labor and they won't be able to compete. Most other countries, that's not how it works. The whole sector, all of fast food is either unionized or not unionized. And so the companies are not competing against each other based on how little they can pay their workers. They have to compete against each other based on how good their product is, how well they manage their business, just how good they are at running a business as opposed to paying low wages. And so that's another piece of what that we, in the work that we've done about imagining a labor law that would better serve working people, that's an important piece of it.
So I'm assuming that strengthening the unions is kind of like the first most obvious tool in the toolbox to evening the scales. But what other tools are there?
So other tools are ensuring that other ways of ensuring that workers are treated fairly on the job. I mean, right now there's there's a book that was written by Elizabeth Anderson, is an academic, that sort of equates the way that the law puts employers as like the authoritarian. If you make the connection to sort of political system, employers are sort of allowed to be authoritarian in the workplace. And that's, as we're kind of getting a little bit of a sense of lately, that's a very difficult environment, context to sort of operate in when you feel you have no agency and no power. And you think about, most working people spend most of their conscious lives at work, right? I mean, we spend more time on the job. You spend 8 hours a day at least on the job. You're sleeping a lot of the rest of those 24 hours. If you're not treated fairly, if you feel like you're being exploited and dominated, it's really hard to have a good life. So there are other ways that the law could better support working people to not feel so dominated. We have, again, in contrast to a lot of the rest of the world, something called at-will employment. It means an employer can fire you for a good reason, a bad reason, or no reason, as long as it's not one of a small category of unlawful reasons like race discrimination or sex discrimination. But, Ken goes to work one day and they're like, you know what? I don't like people who wear black shirts to work. You're fired. Completely unfair, may feel completely arbitrary and random, and there's nothing you can do about it. So there's a little bit the beginning of a movement to say, you know what? It wouldn't be such a big deal to tell employers, you know what? Just tell Ken why he got fired and have it be a rational reason. That is the way that most of the rest of the world operates. And again, they're still existing. So the idea that, you sometimes hear from companies, oh my God, we could never live that way. There'd be so much litigation. It would be so difficult. Well, somehow the rest of the world has found a way to operate under rules like that just preserve at least some basic level of dignity and fairness for working people.
Do you see that, Ken, when you're around the world? I mean, I was watching the documentary today, and it showed you playing in front of huge audiences in Greece and Paris. And
yeah, I mean, people around the rest of when we're in Europe, seem to have a lot more vacation time and enjoy their lives a lot more. We're always like, and I don't know the depth of a lot of their, political intricacies over there, but I do know, they'd be called socialists, you know what I mean? And but man, they seem to have a lot more people that seem to be struggling less financially and seem to enjoy their quality of life a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. How do they connect to your band's lyrics when especially the ones that are so American centric? I saw that one. What was the Guthrie lyric that you changed to Tories?
Yeah, all you phonies, and we changed
all you phonies
to be on tour in the UK when there was the railroad was out on strike, and a lot of others followed suit, and the Tories being their version of the Republican Party, the chorus said all you phonies, and I just started saying all you Tories, and people seemed to love it. I definitely in Ireland and the UK there's a long history of activism and labor, and I think then you get into some of those socialist countries where, like you said, it's not a company-to-company organization. They're all said that they're speaking up about the rights that we take for granted in our country, and we're fighting for it. So they can identify with it because they're living it,
Can you talk a little? I've heard you say a couple of times tonight about the connection between protest music and Irish music. I don't know anything about that. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to punk rock, half punk rock songs are like, party anthems in a way, and the rest are protesting, whether it's about, the Queen. I grew up listening to songs about all the bands I loved, the Sex Pistols and the Clash, and, they're singing about the Queen. And I didn't even know what was going on. I was 14, 13 years old. God, I don't know who this Queen and the British government is, but they sound like shitty people, and Irish music, was the same thing, singing about, the oppressive. And I'm, not to get into their politics, but it was people that were standing up for their beliefs, and that was just always attractive to me to play and sing music that were core to my beliefs. It's more authentic that way, and these just happen to be my beliefs. And sometimes it's just the things that I'm experiencing and feeling that come out in songs, and then other days it is feeling like that responsibility to carry a message and stuff like that. And especially in these times, it's like I got tons of people in my life saying, "Hey, you really have to do this?" Like, death threats coming to the house and email death threats and this and that. And I go, yeah, because I don't want it to be that America went down while I was involved in having a platform and I didn't choose to use it, So, yeah, it's like, whoever started that clap, thank you.
Yeah. Was there I'm assuming, did that start before that viral video of the wager?
Oh yeah, because I've got other viral videos and just being out, listen, dare to speak out against the leader, and listen, a lot of times the people that are threatening me are people that I have more in common with, age-wise, background-wise, working history-wise, and but so I listen, if the country is ever going to really survive any of this, there's got to be some unity. Like, there's got to be some coming together moment, whether it's a politician, whether it's sanity coming in some way. And so, like, I try to put my best foot forward and find the commonalities. That's when I'm in a debate with someone over politics, I try to find the commonalities. But having said that, we're all human, right? And you're having a day and someone's like screaming things that to be false, know to be flat out crazy QAnon bullshit, to call it as it is. And I'm supposed to have a friendly debate. It's hard sometimes, It's really hard. Sometimes there are many days, people always telling us, shut up and sing. And there's many days that I want to go, don't you think that's what I want to do? I remember saying the last show we did before the election was in at a university, at a university's amphitheater or whatever, on the outskirts of Pittsburgh. So it was kind of a red county, it was our last show before the election, and I said, I hope this is the last time this guy's name ever needs to come out of my mouth. And I actually thought it was going to be the last time, lo and behold. So my point is, I don't want to be talking about it. I don't want to be arguing with people. I root for Americans, and I root for the citizens of the country, by the way, whether they're here, we don't even have time for that argument, but, I was also raised in a community where it's like, the other side of the band song is singing about the Irish experience in America and Boston and the roots here. We're immigrants. Mm. So I was raised, and I'm glad I was, by people who taught me, as a descendant of immigrants, your job is to always have the hand out to help the next person in line behind you. And so that's what I do, what I sing about, and people don't like it. And to say, like, we should all have a fair wage, we should all be kind to each other, we should just settle down, like, that's apparently radical now.
Sharon, what is a fair wage?
What is a fair wage? I mean, I'll tell you what it isn't, is $7.25 an hour, which is what what the federal minimum wage is. I was telling Ken backstage before, I used to work for Senator Kennedy, I mentioned, and Senator Kennedy's been gone for 16 years, and he floor managed the last time we raised the minimum wage, which is just shocking and wrong and bad. And for tipped workers, if they're not lucky enough to live in a state like Massachusetts that has a higher tip minimum wage, the federal tip minimum wage is $2.13 an hour. In the wealthiest country in the history of the world, it's just appalling. So, we've had for a long time, we had a fight for 15, which has now morphed into a fight for 20, 21, $22 an hour. I mean, defy people who oppose raising the minimum wage to that level to live for like 5 minutes on less than $20, $25 an hour. So, we are just a long way from guaranteeing just a basic family sustaining wage for every person who works in this country. Again, we live here in the state of Massachusetts where people have a right to be paid more than $7.25 an hour, but there are still a number of states in this country where people are trying to get by. That, by the way, that is a poverty wage, like literally, officially a poverty wage. It makes no sense to have one law that says this is how we're going to say what's the definition of poverty, and then we're going to have another law that says what's the minimum wage, and to have that, have those two things not line up. I mean, it's just wrong.
So paint a picture, if you could, of the worst case scenario where we obviously in the last few months it's taken a decidedly anti-worker turn. And could you point to other examples of other countries where workers, where it can even get worse?
In authoritarian countries, they come for the unions. I hope that's not where we're going, but I will tell you something that a lot of people don't realize is that actually right now in this country, you don't have protection for the right to join a union. Because one of the first things that this president did was fire members of the National Labor Relations Board, and fired enough of them that now the board can't function. The NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, is the federal agency that protects the right to form and join a union, to engage in collective bargaining, to not be fired for wanting to do that. The board is now shut down. And so you go into work. I'm going to use Ken. Ken goes into work. And he wants to organizing a union. And his employer says, I don't like unions. I'm firing you. And you say, you can't do that. That's against the law. Well, too bad for you. Because you have no right to go to court and ask the court to tell your employer that was illegal, what they did. Only this little government agency has the right to do that. And right now, because of the actions of this president, that agency can't function. And so you don't really have a right to organize right now. That puts us in a pretty small cohort of countries around the world that don't protect the right to collective bargaining, and certainly none of what we would think of as our peer countries, that have the kinds of mature economies and societies that we thought that we had. There is no other country that doesn't have a right to collective bargaining in that group.
This is depressing.
I'm going to go to a question from the audience. This is Adam says, historically, leftist ideologies appealed to the working class. However, in modern day America, the opposite is true. Why do you think this switch happened? Either of you?
I think it's because I've seen it firsthand. It's, the bait and switch. Like, let me dangle this carrot over here to get you mad. And, obviously, I think if you're talking about in labor unions, there's a problem. I don't know the stats, but a large majority of them are made up by white males. And, you know, they took the bait that the Trump administration and people like him dangled in front of them to say, like, get mad at this, get mad at these people. And all of a sudden, that element of a large portion of the union base and workforce followed that carrot. That's what I see.
So I agree with all of that, but it doesn't give me joy to say this. I spent most of my career in Democratic political jobs, but I also think that the Democratic Party also has let down working class people. We didn't do enough to deliver on promises that we made. You know, I don't think that we deserve the lion's share of the blame, but still, on our watch, we didn't deliver enough. And I think we really need to think about how to better deliver on those promises. And that's the only way we're going to regain the trust of working class voters.
So short of political action and voting, what can people do, you know, from either of your points of view to affect change and, you know, give workers more rights in this country?
Well, also, I mean, I want to thank Ken for being at these protests and rallies and people coming out and using their voice to say that this isn't okay, what's going on. You know, I think politicians can do at least one thing, which is count votes. And if they see that people in this country don't think that what's happening is okay, and they can count large numbers of people thinking that what is happening in this country isn't okay, then maybe they will get the backbone to tell this president that what is happening in this country isn't okay. And I think, you know, I hope people come because they care and they believe that and they want to make their voices heard. But if they come because they want to hear Dropkick Murphys, that's okay too.
Come for the music and maybe hear the message. You know, that's what I've always tried to like be, you know, that I hope that with a Dropkick Murphys fan that may get anything out of it, that they get it more out of the lyrics than anything I say from the stage, you know. I would say that obviously we can't affect any political change from a actual, you know, way of changing anything within the government. But when you get back to talking about that video, the MAGA video, the first thing where the video starts is me saying, where are all the other punk bands? And it's not my nature to call people out, and I'm not trying to do that. And there are other bands, you know, here and there that are speaking out. And of course, you have your Bruce Springsteens and your Green Days, and God bless them, but they'll be all right no matter what happens. And then you have the bands that I would consider Dropkick Murphys and are like working musicians, you know. Here's where we are, you know, they're up here, we're here. And there's a real fear with a lot of people that speak out, whether it's in many career paths, but speaking in mine, in music, I know for a fact there's people that are speaking that don't want to speak out because they don't want to lose X amount of their fan base and, you know, not be able to function as a band anymore. And I don't want to call people out, but I feel like we're guys, we've been singing about Reagan, we've been singing about Bush. Where'd everyone go? Like and I would love to start to gently challenge other punk bands with a platform to like speak up, because if we're all speaking up, then we're taking the power back, you know.
Have you noticed a change in the number of people showing up since you've been more outspoken?
This tour this summer, I think, will mostly tell that. I haven't really. No, I think it's a kind of for every person you lose. I also think there's a lot of people that have said to us, "I'm burning your records. I'll never come see you again." And then hey, you're back. You know, and you know, and I'm sure there are some that burn them and they're never coming back. Don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of it where it's just heated momentary rhetoric, and you know, you go home and you go, "No, what do I really care what that guy from the band thinks?" You know what I mean, politically. But I also do think that there's some other people that, one of the comments we've got a lot is like, I used to listen to you as a teenager and I kind of fell off, but this has reignited my, you know, me listening to you again. So that's kind of cool.
Okay. Here's one for Sharon. What, let's see, Jim, what circumstances would justify a call for a general strike? And also please define what a general strike is.
Do it.
So a general strike is when lots of unions go out on strike at the same time, not necessarily because of issues related to their direct employer, but as a display of solidarity sort of across the economy. So it's more of a political act in addition to being an economic act. There is actually, I don't want to say how long I've been doing this, for a long time. This is the first time I can think of where people are serious in the labor movement, are seriously talking about a general strike. I'm not saying it's gonna happen next May Day or Labor Day or whatever, but it is definitely more in the ether than it's been before. There's also been a movement, coordination across the labor movement, especially among big unions. So think like the United Auto Workers, who represent all of the people at the big three auto companies. So big companies like that, big unions like that, to coordinate when their collective bargaining agreements expire, because that's usually when you get a strike. If you have a collective bargaining agreement, usually you have agreed to give up the right to strike for the duration of the agreement. So what the unions have been doing, and again, I've never seen this happen before, is try to have all of those big agreements expire at the same time so that everybody or lots of union members have that ability to go out on strike at the same time. So it's out there. People are talking about it.
And what effect would that have on the economy?
Well,
if there were a general strike?
Even with the last auto workers strike, that it definitely got the attention of those companies in a way that just talking about unfairness or trading paper across a negotiating table doesn't do. So then multiply that, and you can affect. You have lots of economists on CNN talking about at what point does it actually affect the overall growth in the economy for that year, that quarter, that year, whatever interest rate. It's a lot of our economy has a lot of interdependence within it. So you start having even one piece, like all of the auto workers going out on strike at one time, has ripple effects. You could imagine then lots of pieces of the economy just ceasing. I mean, imagine airline pilots and flight attendants going out on strike. Like, what happens to everybody else whose ability to do their jobs are dependent on being able to get on an airplane and do their thing?
I mean, I've heard whispers that if a certain someone refused to leave office, that would be the cause for a general strike. That there's already talk of that. What other sets of circumstances would you think would warrant that?
I don't want to speculate. I haven't heard that level of specificity, but I think working people in this country have a lot on the line right now. And you never know. There's sometimes there's just an intangible moment where things come together and people get pushed too far.
Someone wants to know, Ken, when you were doing union work, do you mean to say, were you a union representative? Whoever asked that question.
Yep.
Is that right? Yeah. When you were doing union work, were you a union rep?
No, I was a young kid with a poor work ethic that was. But my grandfather was a union organizer, and I always believed in the theory of a group, the masses. Solidarity can accomplish more than one person alone, and that probably saved my job for a while, But I was a young kid who was a late bloomer in life in terms of getting my act together.
Okay. Sharon, is an ESOP, employee stock ownership plan, like Sullivan Tires and others, an avenue for labor change?
It's an ESOP. We refer to them as ESOPs. I think it can be a way to help workers build wealth. I don't think it's a power building mechanism. So while I think they can do good, so an ESOP is a way for workers to have some ownership interest in the companies that they work for, but it usually doesn't translate into any control over the company.
Right. So they're given stock every year, right? If they stick around.
They can be structured different ways, but yeah, basically.
Okay. We've got time for one or two more. Looks like someone really wants to hold you to specifically answer what a living wage would be. I'm not an economist. I'm a lawyer. I'm not an economist. So I don't know that I can do better than that. But they're, down the street at MIT, they're actually famous for, they have a living wage calculator. You can put different inputs in, like where you live, how many kids you have, and it will give you an idea of like what the rents are in that area code or that zip code, and it gives you a sense of how much money you need to make. But I can promise you there is no place in this country where you can live on $7.25 an hour or 2 times that. You only need to be at least up around above $20 an hour, even have the very minimum level of a family sustaining wage. Okay. Well, do you either of you have any more questions for one another?
No, we had a nice chat backstage. We should have filmed that. I appreciate hearing it from the factual, statistical side as much as you can give as a lawyer and not an economist. But I think that more facts, less rhetoric would help us all.
And I will return the compliment. I think more facts and less rhetoric, but we also need more storytelling. And I think that's what's so, people need to be able to see themselves in what is happening to working people in this country. And it's one reason why I love the video so much, because especially those images of people opening up envelopes and seeing that they're losing benefits, that things that they rely on just to have some decency in their lives are being taken away. It's happening to people all over this country. But for those to whom it's not happening, to have to see those images, I think is really powerful. So thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, now lastly from the audience, Ken, what is your favorite Woody Guthrie song?
Oh, man. 1913 Massacre was always one of my favorites before I got into the world of going through the archives. Is then to shift to say the favorite that we've done, of the unpublished lyrics would be Christ, I forgot the goddamn name of it. 10 Times More is great. There's the story behind 10 Times More is, which is a very, very appropriate rallying song about how, whether it's the boss, whether it's the, oppressor of any way, whoever it is, if we want to affect change, we've got to be 10 times louder, and that song, we never put an instrument other than a harmonica in the background. We just all started, because we were writing these songs on the fly, and which is not what we typically do. And I started singing this melody, and everyone started stomping and banging on stuff, and that's the recording, just like banging on stuff and a little harmonica, just so we could keep the the pitch.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, that's a unique way for us to approach things. Oh, the last one, that's the song I was trying to say. It's just, he just had such a great way of, in a lot of his lyrics, of without even trying to be, unite the workers, just like saying, if you're pointing out the struggles, that to me, you talk about like coming at it for like I was listening to someone talk about during the civil rights movement, and how important the peaceful protest was, because it garnered the sympathy of the public because it was peaceful. And the same with some of Woody's lyrics when he's singing about just the humanity side of it, instead of they're doing this wrong, we got to do this right. Just the humanity side of it, which I think what that video does too. Our last video is it shows the people and what the effects are on the people, and that's one of the things I respect the most about Woody, and especially his storytelling ability.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much to Ken Casey and Sharon Block. Mm-hmm. Thank you to the Center for Labor and a Just Economy, and thank you to all of you for coming out tonight.
Thank you.